cannot manage a horse. Fetch me some wine, and a pretty wench. My lord, pardon, I'm no serving man either. I have the honour to be a knight. Knighthood has fallen on sad days. Aerion and Duncan the Tall, the Hedge Knight. Aerion Brightflame is the perfect villain for a smaller scale A Song of Ice and Fire story such as The Hedge Knight and its upcoming TV adaptation. On the surface, he seems a typical spoiled young lordling with no concept of respect to those he sees below him. House Targaryen, like any other noble family, has had a mix of personalities when it comes to its members, but every now and then, maybe once a generation, you tend to find a character who is the sheer definition of a phenomenon I like to call Targaryen Arrogance. A sense of entitlement some members of the house possess, believing their Valyrian blood and the legacy of House Targaryen alone makes them automatically better than their peers, and those beneath them, viewing them as not worthy. What I find ironic about this idea of Targaryen arrogance is prior to the Dance of the Dragons, given the power dragons gave the house, you can understand where this arrogance and overconfidence could stem from. But by the time you get to the likes of Aerion, dragons have been dead for generations, and House Targaryen's power is a shadow of what it once was. Aerion really shouldn't feel so comfortable with the level of entitlement he outwardly portrays. While House Targaryen isn't exactly weak, it's not exactly at its apex either. In Aerion, we see many of the themes and traits of other so-called villainous characters from throughout the main books. The likes of Joffrey Baratheon, Ramsay Bolton, and the beggar king Viserys Targaryen. In fact, Aerion mirrors Viserys in so many ways that I think Aerion's storyline and fate are a reflection of what I think Viserys' ultimate fate would have been if he had lived longer in the books. In a way, this idea of Targaryen arrogance was both their downfall. In this video, we'll be taking a deep dive into the story of Aerion Targaryen and analysing his role in The Hedge Knight and the parallels he possesses with other characters from the main books in terms of being a villain. Aerion is one of those A Song of Ice and Fire characters where, at the same time, we know quite a lot about him, mostly thanks to the Hedge Knight, but given his important role, we also surprisingly know little after the known events of the novellas. We don't know his exact age, but it's speculated from contextual clues that he was born sometime between 191 and 194 AC, making him around 15 to 18 years of age during the Hedge Knight. From the language George R. R. Martin uses in the novella itself, I tend to believe he seems to be more around the elder of the age range. Aerion was born the second son to Prince Maekar Targaryen and his wife Lady Diana Dane, with one older brother, Daeron, two younger brothers in Aemon and Aegon, and two younger sisters, Daela and Rhae. During the events of Hedge Knight, Aerion is still quite low down the line of succession. This element alone really speaks to the depth of Aerion's entitlement and arrogance, that even being a more minor Targaryen prince at this stage, he thinks himself so much better than those below him, despite his own position in the family at this time not necessarily reflecting that. But like much of his kin, outwardly, Aerion was a perfect example of the definition of a traditional Targaryen in terms of his appearance. He had long, curly, silver gold hair, deep violet eyes, and pale, porcelain, perfect skin. His face was sculpted and impetuous, with high brows, sharp cheekbones, and a straight nose. These features only feeding his mentality even further. But Aerion also displayed signs, and some may say is the perfect example, of Targaryen madness, which to some extent is true, and a subject we shall delve deeper into later in this video. Even those among his close family would acknowledge Aerion's nature, especially his brothers, Daeron and Aegon. Aerion was despised by Aegon, who considered him an inveterate liar. According to Ryman Fossaway, the prince was all smiles and courtesy in front of his father, Maekar, but his true nature showed in front of others, with Prince Daeron Targaryen thinking his younger brother quite the monster. One fan theory suggests that Maekar was somewhat aware of Aerion's true nature, but was willing to turn a blind eye, given how disappointed he viewed his eldest son Daeron as turning out. You don't come by the name Daeron the Drunken for any particular good reason. Aerion's quite the monster. He thinks he's a dragon in human form, you know. That's why he was so wroth at the puppet show. A pity he wasn't born a fossaway. Then he'd think himself an apple when we'd all be a deal safer. But there you are, Aerion Targaryen to Sir Duncan the Tall, the Hedge Knight. Even as a young teen, Aerion was showing signs of the kind of person he would become, especially when it came to how he treated his brother. He once threw Aegon's pet cat down a well, though he claimed otherwise. Aerion once visited Aegon in his bedchambers during the dead of night and put a knife to Aegon's private parts and joked about removing them so Aegon would become a sister he could marry. So even before the events of the Hedge Knight, Aerion had already kind of been established as a villain of Egg's story. Out of all of the comparisons of Aerion to later characters, to me he resembles Viserys the most, especially in terms of his relationship with his younger siblings. It's established very early on in the Game of Thrones that Viserys is controlling and abusive both physically and mentally towards his sister Daenerys, which in a way can kind of mirror elements of Aerion's relationship with Aegon. But the big difference is we do know and understand why Viserys is the way he is, given his extremely difficult childhood, running from city to city trying to survive. His circumstances are drastically different from Aerion's, who was extremely privileged. Viserys did love his sister in his own way, but it was a very toxic and twisted love that doesn't necessarily excuse any of his actions. I don't really think you can say the same for Aerion, because of the limited nature of the novellas and how much Aerion's story comes from the world of Ice and Fire. We don't really have enough context with Aerion to say why he hated Aegon so much, and what led to his frankly psychotic behaviour towards him. In a way, I think this is why Viserys is more widely seen as a better villain, because we as a reader understand the context of his actions on a deeper level, where Aerion is just, well, mad. But that does give the upcoming TV adaptation, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, the ability to take the framework of Aerion and build a really compelling villain. The first time we as readers meet Aerion is during the first Duncan Egg novella, The Hedge Knight, where he kinda serves as the main antagonist of Duncan. In the very eventful year of 209 AC, Aerion travels to Ashford for the tourney at Ashford Meadow. The day before the tourney, when Sir Duncan the Tall comes to join the event, Aerion mistakes Duncan for a stable boy, ordering him to take his horse and scoffing at him when Duncan claims he was a knight. When Aerion first makes his entrance, we see how a lower member of society, such as Duncan, views the likes of a Targaryen, as Duncan kinda seems in awe of the prince. But what is very telling is Aerion's reaction to this. He's rude, arrogant, abrasive, and outwardly he may look like a Targaryen prince, but his personality and manner do not reflect that at all. In this brief interaction with Aerion, the reader is told all we need to know about his character. We learn much more about Aerion's character the next day during the tourney itself. Aerion entered the field where he seems to be about to challenge his cousin, Prince Valar Targaryen, to a joust. But instead he challenges Sir Humphrey Harding. Sir Duncan was very surprised to hear his squire, Egg, secretly Prince Aegon Targaryen, shout at Humphrey to kill Aerion. It's only later in the story Duncan finds out that Egg is in fact Aegon, and we start to understand how much Aegon deeply despises his brother. During this joust against Humphrey Harding, Aerion lowers his lance and instead of striking Humphrey's shield, implants it in his horse, causing it to crash and fall atop Humphrey. The horse dies in agony with Humphrey's leg injured. Though Aerion's actions were called an accident, Aegon was certain it was intentional. But Duncan found it difficult to believe that a knight and a Targaryen prince could be so unchivalrous and act so dishonourably. The Lord of Ashford awarded Aerion's charger to Humphrey as payment for the death of his horse, which infuriates Aerion. So not only do we learn much of Aerion's character via his interaction with Duncan, we also see this superior attitude extend to effectively anyone he deems lower than himself. Any other knight in that tourney had acted with such dishonour, they would have been rightly shamed for it. But because of his privileged position Aerion is in, he knows he can effectively act and do as he wishes with almost impunity, which in turn feeds back into a sense of arrogance and ego. What George R. R. Martin has done is very quickly create this villain that is easy for the readers to hate, and thus make us root for the success of Duncan in only a few pages when you compare it to the length Game of Thrones goes to establish these villains. On the tourney grounds that night, a puppet show portraying a knight slaying a dragon deeply offends Aerion, as we know, Aerion believes he was a dragon. We would later come to learn that Aerion doesn't just view this as a metaphor, he truly does believe he is a dragon in human form, with this aspect of his personality directly correlating to his so-called Targaryen madness and eventual fate. It is true that Aerion does seem to stand out as a prime example of this madness, that seems to become more common in the blood of House Targaryen post the Dance of the Dragons. While of course there had been quote-unquote mad Targaryens before the dance, the amount of them seems to skyrocket in the later half of the Targaryen rule of Westeros. Aerion had his men-at-arms destroy the puppeteers' stall and their puppets, and deliberately broke the fingers of one of the puppeteers, a girl named Tanzel, who Duncan had become quite taken with. Duncan, who Aegon had called for help when the commotion started, then attacked Aerion, punching him and kicking him in the stomach and teeth. Aerion's men and retainers apprehended Duncan, and Aerion ordered them to break his teeth with a hammer and then cut his belly open. It's then that Aegon arrived and revealed himself as Prince Aegon, ordering them to stop. They obeyed, but Duncan was still arrested for striking a prince of House Targaryen. Prince Baelor Targaryen, Baelor Breakspear, the Crown Prince and Hand of the King, uncle to Aegon and Aerion, visited Duncan in his cell and told him that his nephew, Aerion, had been telling his father, Maekar, that the puppet show was treason against House Targaryen and an incitement to revolt. As Aegon's other brother, Prince Daeron, had been telling his father a falsehood that Aegon had been kidnapped by robber knights, Duncan's situation was particularly dire. Aerion was demanding his head, which Prince Baelor would not allow, but they could not deny Aerion a trial. Baelor reminded Duncan that the last time a man was found guilty of striking one of royal blood, his hand was cut off. Baelor further reminded Duncan that a knight could request a trial by combat instead of one by judgment. However, upon hearing Duncan's request of a trial by combat, Aerion demanded a trial of 7 instead, which Prince Baelor did not deny. Aerion knew that the Hedge Knight, Duncan, had few friends and would find it difficult to find 6 others to fight by his side, whereas he could have the Kingsguard and 2 Targaryen princes on his. Aerion bribes a Steffon Fossaway, one of Duncan's few acquaintances at Ashford, to join his side of the trial by promising him a lordship. In total, Aerion's side consisted of his brother Prince Daeron, his father Prince Maekar, Steffon Fossaway, and 3 knights of the Kingsguard, Willem Wild, Donald of Duskendale, and Roland Crakehaw. Aerion's uncle Prince Baelor joined Duncan's side, as did Sir Humphrey Harding, Sir Humphrey Beesbury, Sir Robin Risling, Sir Ryman Fossaway, and Sir Lionel Baratheon. During the trial, Aerion would put his lance through Duncan's side and struck him from the saddle with a morning star. However, Duncan refused to yield and used his skill as a brawler from Fleabottom to beat the prince down, hitting him in the head with his shield until the crest of his helm broken off. When Duncan threatened his eye with a dagger, Aerion yielded and withdrew his accusation. Duncan forced Aerion to repeat his submission before Lord Ashford, ending the threat to Duncan's other champions. However, Prince Baelor Breakspear died from injuries sustained in the trial, as did the 2 Humphreys. A really overlooked part of the Trial of 7 comes from the fact we witness it from Duncan's point of view, and therefore we see how the repercussions of it, in this case Baelor's death, stems from him being this idea of a virtuous and idle knight, defending those in need, which resulted in his fight with Aerion at the puppet show. However, the whole history of House Targaryen changes in a lot of ways thanks to Duncan, but if we flip this idea slightly, in many ways Aerion is just as responsible for how events such as Prince Baelor's death transpired. It was Aerion Targaryen's arrogance, his attitude to those he saw below him, his apparent madness that led to him overreacting to the puppet show, and thus his fight with Duncan. So it does go to show us how both the hero and the villain of the story each play a role in determining how events played out, which in my view is why Aerion makes such a good villain. His actions as a villain are as impactful as Duncan's as a hero. And my father, he never thought the throne would pass to him, and yet it did. He used to say that it was his punishment for the blow that slew his brother. I pray he found peace in death that he never knew in life. Maester Aemon Targaryen to Samwell Tarly, A Feast for Crows, Chapter 26, Samwell 3. One thing I like about Maekar Targaryen is he does seem to recognise the huge issues with his eldest two sons, but regardless, still tries to find a way to help change them as people. In both the cases of Daeron and Aerion, it would prove to ultimately be hopeless. He does seem to try and do the right thing by them, with this perfectly being displayed by allowing Aegon, a prince of House Targaryen, to become a squire of a Hedge Knight and travel up and down Westeros with Sir Duncan. He recognises the mistakes made with his eldest sons and tries to rectify them with Aegon. In terms of Aerion himself and the shame he brought upon not just himself but his family with his actions at Ashford in 209 AC, Maekar would send him to Lys in the hopes that a few years in the Free Cities would change him for the better. I'm not exactly sure why Maekar would think this would make a difference, but at least he was trying something. While the latter life of Aerion is not documented in great detail, if Aerion did change in any way as a result of this, it appears to be both minimal and ultimately fleeting. As for his time in Lys, we know very little about what he got up to. Unsurprisingly, there are several rumours that he fathered bastard children while he was there. Bastards whose descendants may very well still be living in the Free City during the timeline of the main book series. However, just like the bastards of one of his kin, Sarah Targaryen, decades before, we don't really know the fate of the bastard children. We also know that he spent some time in the Sellsword Company, the Second Sons, during his exile, and it would appear some of the things he learned while doing so would certainly come in handy during the years following his return to Westeros. We can't say for sure when he returned from Lys, but it is sometime before the year 219 AC, given that was the year of the Third Blackfyre Rebellion, a war in which Aerion would fight and play a key role in, according to some versions of events. The World of Ice and Fire describes his actions during the war as well known, with I suspect it being something George R. R. Martin would like to reveal at a later date in a proposed future Duncan Egg novella, or more likely a Fire and Blood Volume 2. All we can really say is that after Aegor Rivers was captured during the war, Aerion and the Hand of the King, Lord Brendan Rivers, would urge King Aerys I Targaryen to put Bittersteel to death, but with the king deciding to send him to the wall instead. Ultimately, Aerion and Bloodraven would be proven correct when Bittersteel escaped on his way to join the Night's Watch. There are some contextual clues that also suggest that Aerion may have acted dishonourably during the war. At the end of the final battle, the pretender Aegon I Blackfyre was killed after he had surrendered and had given up his sword. While we don't know who it was that killed Aegon, fans speculate that out of all of the named characters involved in the battle, the most likely to have done so would be Aerion or Bloodraven. Given what we know about Aerion, it would not surprise me at all if this were true. One night in his cups, he drank a jar of wildfire after telling his friends it would transform him into a dragon. But the gods were kind and transformed him into a corpse. Jorah Mormont to Jon Snow. A Clash of Kings Chapter 6. Jon 1. Now this is where the timeline gets very muddy thanks to the lack of published material that covers this period, with all we have to work with being the World of Ice and Fire, and some throwaway lines from the main books. But after the death of King Aerys I in 221 AC, Aerion's father became king very unexpectedly. We know his elder brother Prince Daeron became his father's heir for a period of time until his own death, at which Aerion would become his father's heir. As his father's heir, it makes sense that Aerion would need to marry. His match was his cousin Daenora Targaryen, a woman who was said to be slow and simple-minded. Together they had a single child, a son ominously named Maegor, born in the year 332 AC. There's only ever been one other Targaryen since the conquest to bear the name Maegor, and of course that's Maegor the Cruel, the second son of Aegon the Conqueror. And while outside of lore he divides opinion, within it he's by far the most despised Targaryen king. You don't earn the name the Cruel for no reason. So the fact Aerion would name his own son this, in theory, the future king, says a lot about Aerion as a person. We can't really say if this was meant as a tribute to a king he looked up to, or a misplaced jape, but I tend to favour the latter. But we must also factor in his state of mind at this time, as by 332 AC, Aerion's apparent Targaryen madness had well and truly set in. You can maybe see why naming his child Maegor might not be the actions of a wholly sane man. The same year as his son's birth, Aerion died screaming after drinking a cup of wildfire, believing it would transform him into a dragon. So his death links back to how we first really met Aerion in the Hedge Knight. One of the implied reasons as to why Aerion was so offended at the puppet show was the fact he truly believed he was a dragon in human form. The fact this also plays a role in his death also shows us just how deeply rooted this concept is within Aerion. While we cannot say if Aerion was truly mad during the Hedge Knight, you can definitely see the early signs of it that will later develop into true madness. A factor that is often overlooked is Aerion was already insufferable and arrogant when he was very far down the line in succession, with no one realistically foreseeing him becoming heir. Being Prince of Dragonstone would have only fed his ego and arrogance more, which in turn could have fueled his growing madness further. My personal theory with Targaryen madness is it's not madness as we know it, but it could be some sort of side effect of dragon dreams, with the likes of Aerion, Aerys II, Viserys the Beggar King, and to some extent Egg and Maester Aemond as well, dreaming of the return of dragons, Daenerys' dragons, with each of these people entertaining these dreams in very different ways. In Aerion's case, he believed he was the dragon that was to be reborn, hence why it escalated to his death by wildfire. But what this madness and possible dragon dreams do is add another layer of complexity to an already very compelling villain. Finn Bennett has been cast as Aerion in The Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, so we have an actor who can portray these different elements of what make Aerion the perfect villain, with him hopefully being held to the same esteem with the likes of Joffrey, Viserys and Ramsay in terms of the impact on the show and the wider story. I think if the Duncan novellas are going to work as a TV show, it needs to absolutely nail Aerion during its first season to a T. We need to have a villain the general audience can truly hate and despise, and thus help ensure Duncan has a real purpose in driving the story forward, keeping the viewers engaged week in and week out.